All right. Hello, guys. Hello to anyone watching the video. It is 11:30, so I'm going to turn on my mic, but I'm still doing a little bit of setup on my end here. I'm going to use some Ableton today, and I'm hoping to see some of you stop by so that perhaps you can participate in the soundtrack project I'm going to be working with. But I'm going to be doing a little bit with Ableton as well, more or less pertaining to this project, and I could perhaps import. Let me go ahead and do this actually. I'm going to export the Midi from this project. Can I do that? Can I just copy this? I'm wondering if I can get just rip the MIDI straight from Soundtrap. Create, cut. Nope. Export MIDI tracks to file. Oh, here we go. Oh, well, that's convenient. fxdemo.mid. Okay, so then I just have to load that into here. Give me a moment here. I'm still kind of waiting around for people to show. Okay, so downloads. I want to add this folder. Yeah, cool. We have the beat and everything. Okay, so then I'm going to take this in. Raise the octave up a bit. Yeah, there we go. Oh, that's fun. Alright, let me restart that source real quick. One sec. Here, let me see if I can do it. Oh boy, my webcam's off too. Alright, one sec. Let me restart both of my video sources then. Let's see. Properties. That's very interesting that both of them aren't working for today's stream. Okay, it looks like I'm gonna have to have them on to edit them. So, yeah, let me do a little reset on my camera here. We'll be up and running shortly. Oh. Okay, I might just have to go for the old unplug and plug back in trick. Yeah, it doesn't want work. Okay, one sec, guys. Gonna unplug this. Hooray! Okay, I just need to do the same with my Elgato. Yes, I'm using an Elgato string. Just one sec. Yeah, this needs to be restarted too. I don't understand why that would be. Okay. Okay, let's just go ahead and deactivate that one. And activate it again. Hello there. We are good. Okay. Perfect. So, I'm putting together the Midi from yesterday's project and moving it into Ableton, making a little arrangement of it. The audio might be, actually, I'm not sure if I want to move. I think I'm just going to move like parts of it, get the chord progression in, at the very least, and then get some tracks together here. That will help with the Soundtrap project. Also, I'm going to switch to my camera as I am going to set up the QuickTime so I can have drawings on screen. So give me a second for that one. Okay. Yep, it's looking at me. All right. Okay, so what is today about? Well, you might see the title. You might know. It's about compressors and EQ. So these are two audio effects, and I'm going to talk quite a lot about compressors and EQ today and test them on some things. And I want to do it in Ableton, at least to start out, because, well, Soundtrap's compressor, let's just say, is limited, not only functionally. I mean, it sounds good. It works well. A little light on it. It sounds good and it works well, but it's not really good for explaining how a compressor works. So we're going to take a look at some ones in Ableton. I also have a couple notes on it that I'm going to bring up after we just mess with a few. Cool? Alright, so I'm going to switch this down here, and we're going to get started. Alright, let me move my camera out of the way. Yeah, there's really nothing you need to see in the top right, so this is Ableton. That's right. I did this last or a couple days ago, like on the first Friday I did something with Ableton. Today we're going to do a little bit more because there are some plugins, external software, as well as Ableton's stock plugins that are very good for, or very good compressors on their own, and we're going to mess with them. Alright, so I'm going to make sure that, first of all, we are getting sound to the Elgato so you can hear what I'm doing. So, do you hear this? Okay, I'm getting levels, so we're good. Gonna maybe take it down some though, because it might get loud. Adjust me a little bit. Okay, we're good to go. Alright, so this is the MIDI from yesterday's project. Let me go ahead and pull that up. That's in another window. So it's from this. I'll go ahead and play this out really quick so you can get context of what we're working with. This is the beat we had yesterday, and we're going to apply some compression and EQ to clean it up today as well. Let's talk about them. So, and as well as work on this beat some, because that's what it's all about, making music, right? Excuse me. Yeah, basically that. So we're gonna work on some more elements of this and explain compression and EQ as we go. Okay, so I was working on a piano track because we have a piano track here ready to go. So we're just gonna work on the MIDI for this one. I have the chords, and then on it, it looks like it's already got some effects built in. I would like to do it from scratch if I could. I'm gonna try. So we have cheap electronic. I can always just export the audio. Maybe I could use simple piano. I'm gonna pick a different piano instrument that maybe doesn't have a built-in compressor. Let's see what we've got. I think grand piano stretch solo sounds pretty good. Oh, this has a bunch built in. Jeez. Yeah, it's got, well, EQ, reverb. Okay, let's see what we're working with here. We got reverb time, tone, which I'm not sure what's making tone. I can always look inside this instrument rack and see everything that's going on. Or not. We're going to add our own effects, I think. We're going to pull back the reverb, though. Oops, that's still sync to Soundtrap. Let me turn that off. Oh no, that's excuse me? What? Oh, it's when I play my MIDI instrument. Okay, so I'm gonna quickly then save and close this down so that I'm not playing. Or can I maybe just select? No, it's gonna always want to play something. Okay, pull this up in a moment then. Let's get this one record ready. It's loading up the samples. Yep, sounds pretty good. So, we have our MIDI. It's just the chords. I'm deciding what to do with them. Oops. I think this is supposed to be extended out. Yeah. Okay. Let's try that. could play a melody on top or something like that, but I'm thinking of just adjusting the velocity of some of these notes. So down here, the way you would do this in Ableton, normally you'd have like a button up here that you would switch to V and then change all the notes velocities that way. But in Ableton, we can go ahead and pull up this down here, this view. If we open this up, we can see our velocity bars here. And if we select certain notes, I'm going to go ahead and select maybe all of these top notes here. Do something to the top notes of each chord. Or maybe to random notes. I'll just select a couple notes at random. And we're going to do some like revoicing of chords, meaning, well, in this case, just changing the volume of some of the notes on the chord. And we're going to do that just at random here. I'm not really going for a pattern. So I'm going to select a few down here, and then I can go to this bar and I can pull it all down. So you can see the lower the red circle is. It's kind of hard to tell, but the red circle is where the velocity is, and then down here you can see it goes from 1 to 127. 127 being the loudest the note could possibly be, the MIDI note can be, and 1 being the softest. And the piano sample, piano sound varies a lot with velocity. So if we change some of the notes around, it could result in a much different sounding chord. So let's go through this again now with some of these notes lowered down. Makes those lower notes much more prominent. Maybe I could even take some of the lower notes down some even more. Like we'll select stuff towards the bottom now, and then I'll lower it down quite a bit. And maybe I could select all of the ones that are really loud, bring them down. Yeah, see how it changes the sound. Now, as a result of this, because we've got some chords that are soft, some chords that are loud, we have the volume of the track varies a lot. So let's maybe take a closer look at what's going on with the volume. So I'm going to maybe expand this part of the track. So this is our volume meter here, this black bar, and we can watch the level of the volume, and we could perhaps even pull up a utility. We could see here. Well, we'll pull up a compressor on it so that we can turn it on and off and look at what it does. So this is the Ableton compressor, and we'll get into what each button does and what each knob does. But we're going to bypass it for now, so I'm going to turn it off. It's gray. It's being bypassed. It's not being used. This is as it was. We're going to watch the volume meter. So check this out on track number 2, grand piano. This goes. As it decays, the volume reduces, right? Because you have the initial attack when you're just playing the keys, right? When you just hit the hammer. If you know how a piano works, you have the hammer inside that hits a string, and then whatever key you press, it moves a different hammer and strikes a different string, and then you have the initial strike of the hammer on the string, and that's the loudest point, and then it decays from there. So it decreases in volume, and you can see that there on the meter. The peaks of each of these chords are different. So some peak up to here. I'm not sure what this slice is. Perhaps I can. Yeah, here we go. So now I can see numbers. Most are getting up to -6. But some, we have them peaking in slightly different places. even lower them a bit more. So yeah, they're peaking a bit less now. They're going a little lower. Bits lower. But notice this reduction in volume. So let's say that you wanted the volume to stay consistent. Maybe you had like a bunch of other stuff going on, and for example, maybe you had like 8 other tracks at the same time, and they all had their own parts going on, and you had this piano chord in the background, but you can only hear the first part of the chord because, you know, it goes up to like -6 and then it decays quickly down to like -12 or -18 dB. By the way, we're talking about dB loudness, right? This is what this is measuring. Peaks at -6, and then maybe you might hear that in a large mix of other things. But then quickly it's going to fade away. It's going to decay, and then it's going to get lost in the mix, which might be a good thing. But let's say you wanted to hear the entire decay of the note. You wanted to hear it all, the entire thing at the same volume. Well, that's where compressors come in. So I'm going to turn it on. We're going to take a close look at the parameters on this. I'm going to pull it up. I would like to perhaps bring back my old zoom for this. But we'll also pull up some external plug-in compressors, and we'll see how they work. So, isotope. Okay. We can, I think Neutron has a compressor in it. 3 elements. In fact, this is the first time that I've loaded this up. This is an EQ. Okay, it looks like it's got a compressor in it. Good. All right. Yeah, lots going on in this one. Can we increase the size of the window? Yes, we can. Okay, this will be a really good way of looking at it. So we have. Oh, this looks like a little adjust frequency and gain for this filter. Is it? There's a signal level at which compression begins. So this is the threshold. We can lower this down. All right. This will be. Then we have the parameters. Is there the ability to add? Okay, so there's vintage mode. Oh. Knee. Okay. How can I raise this knee? I'm sorry, I haven't used this. This is the first time I've... Knee 14. Did I lower it? Maybe I have to click and drag. Oh, yeah. Okay. And then you can see it getting softer. Oh, that's a good way to represent it. All right. Well, this is kind of a more advanced thing. We can leave that on the track and take a look at it in a second. I want to find couple other compressors that I own. Let's see, or that I have in my library. Let's see, FF Pro C. Let's see if this loads, because a lot of things have broken after the update. It does! Hooray! This is one of my favorites. Very good compressor. Very good compressor. Good threshold here. Yeah, and this is a good one to demonstrate what a compressor does. So I'm going to use this one instead of the Ableton stock compressor because this one will be easier to explain. All right. But first, before I get into that, let's load up the FF Pro C. I'm going to copy this plugin to the snare track, or to this track here, so that we can take a look at just a simple snare drum. Maybe I'll do here. Let's turn this off. Alright, it's already looping. That's good. So, if we take a look at the waveform, it makes up a snare drum. So this is kind of a perfect example of the decaying of volume. Oh, hello. We have a viewer. Hi. How are you doing? We're talking about compression today, and we're working on that the beat that I was working on yesterday. So hello in chat. I'd like to know who is viewing. But yeah, well, this is a snare drum we are looking at. We are looking, and also we are in Ableton, by the way. We are not in Soundtrap right now. We'll get in Soundtrap in a minute, or not a minute, but however long it takes me to explain the compressor. Oh, okay. Hello. It's Lily. Hi, Lily. Okay. So, yes, we are talking about. You may have seen from the title. We are talking about compression. And then later on, we're going to talk about EQs. But first, compressors and how they're useful. And we're going to use them in the beat. I don't know if you were here or have seen yesterday's stream, but I'll quickly play for you what beat we're working on. And you feel free to join in, right? This got the collaboration. So I can open up the track to do that if you'd like. I'd like for students to participate in things. Okay. All right, give it a moment. So let's take a look at all the tracks. First, we got some guitar slices here, a synthesizer, some drum tracks down here. I've yet to organize this or anything, but I'll just play it. That's it for now. That's it for now. But yeah, I did. So I'll go over what I basically did and what the point of this whole beat was. It was to demonstrate a couple of things with a couple of effects, a couple of basic effects. I was like, all right, what are effects? Yes, yeah, this was talking about yesterday. It's like, what are effects? And we'll use a couple basic ones, like what effects do you encounter when you open up, like when you load up a new audio track in Soundtrap, what effects do you encounter and what effects do we have? We've got a lot, right? I was going to focus in on a few, and they're kind of sorted by category, so maybe I'll go like by color or so. That's why I'm kind of focusing. There's the compressor and the EQ down here in the yellow, and I'm focusing on those first because these all have something to do with each other. They're all similar versions of what I'm talking about, or what I'm going to talk about. But yeah, we are messing with some effects. I had found this guitar and also like sample slicing and other things. Like I took this guitar loop that I found in the loop browser. What was it called? If I can zoom in and see the name. Guitar Sometime, right? I found this loop. I brought it in and then I sliced it at a certain part just to get like one little piece that had one chord, right? So maybe I'll go ahead and solo this track. Right? I just wanted that one chord, and it also goes with this synth track, right? I drew the chords in with Midi, and then I got the same chords as a sample. I managed to find some samples with the chords I needed. And there's one with another chord, and I had to transpose some of these, but basically it was like its own rhythm with its own chords, and I just like took what I wanted out of it. Alright, so and I also have another track on it with different sample I used. They have the same effects on them. I'll show you what's on the tracks. Okay, so this is the instrument, but we want to see, so to get to the effects on instrument track, you want to go down here, add effects. So it's got Actually, it doesn't have much. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong track. So it's got auto pan and dynamics, a dynamics compressor. We're talking about this one today. And then the same processing on the second track. So yeah, that's basically what's happening. And also it's going through a guitar amp, which has its own built-in effects. It's got like some bass, mid, and treble knobs, which have something to do with EQ, drive, which is a form of distortion, all sorts of fun things you can do right off the bat with this. So together we get and let's say I were to turn off the effects, or like, yeah, let's say I were to bypass them. This is what it sounds like without. And maybe without the drive on that guitar amp. Basically, that's what the sample started with. All right, that was what the loop sounded like to begin with. And then I added some drive with the guitar amp, just this knob right here. Added two effects, and it all of a sudden sounds way cooler. Then I layered that with a bunch of other stuff, and we had a beat. But I'm in Ableton today because it's got a much more visual compressors. So let's go back there. Actually, yeah, let's take a look at some of the stuff I've written down. So right here we have a snare sample. So let's talk about this. So right now we have a snare sample. This is uncompressed. This is the dry signal, right? The dry audio. We'll listen to it real quick. The sample's a little longer. So we got the metronome going in the background. We can turn that off. So it starts out with what's called a transient. So let's call this. Just write this down. So you have the initial attack of the snare drum when you hit it with your stick. That is called a transient. So this first part, I'm gonna make this bigger, and then back up. I wonder if I could probably make this. Perhaps I could make this a little easier to see. This might be tough on my eyes, but let me see if I can perhaps make it a white theme. Theme, dark, light. Whoa, okay. Yeah, that might be a little easier for y'all to see. Okay, so I kind of like this too. So here we have the initial transient, right? The first part. We're saying from here to here, and then you have kind of like a more consistent pattern going on, which is like the ring of the drum. So you have this more spaced out part of the waveform. This is a waveform, by the way. It's kind of like a way of looking at audio. Oh, and also you have two of them, because one is your left ear and one is your right ear. And so yeah, you have that initial attack, and then it rings out for the rest of the sample. And then you have like a bit of silence afterwards, quite a bit of silence in the file itself. So like, yeah, that's what a snare drum looks like. And now let's put it through a compressor and then see what the output of it looks like. So what I'm going to do, a little clever trick here with Ableton. I'm going to set one of these tracks to resampling. Put this in record. And I'm going to put it through an effect. And then I'm going to record it onto a different track. I'm going to look at what the waveform ends up being, as opposed to what it was. So we'll put it through a compressor. Let's get some basic settings in. So maybe we'll go down here. I'll go really high ratio, fast attack, slow release. And we're also going to gain it up afterwards. We're going to increase the volume afterwards. We're going to look at what's going on too. So we have our knee. Boy, okay, so where is the knee control again? It's been a while since I used this. Ah, here we go. I'm going to make it a hard knee. So it's let me just, okay. Let me talk about things here. So this is, we got a couple controls, right? Also, I'm gonna just go to what I'm drawing here. So we have compressors, right? So it's kind of like a little drawing I made of the snare hit, right? You have the initial transient attack part of things, and then you have the decay. I drew this incorrectly with this mono and stereo. This is supposed to be, there's supposed to be two of these tracks, one of these for the left, one of these for the right, like you saw in Ableton. This represents phase, which we'll get into a little, well, quite a bit later, when we talk about like more of the fundamentals of sound and what phase is. But don't worry about that. Phase is just gonna have to like, just like has what? How can I say this? It has to do with what side the wave. You think of, I can say, I'm saying wave. You just think of the audio as like a wave, and this is the form of the waveform. I'm going to assume it's that you kind of get it a little bit, maybe, but like depending on what side of the graph it is, it tells what phase. But we're not going to get into that right now. Well, I digress. So beforehand, you have, in fact, before I scroll down, let's go ahead and do that little experiment I talked about. We're going to compress that snare drum using this software, and we're going to see what the outcome looks like. A bunch of other styles too. We're getting a good, and you can get a good view here of what's going on. So basically you have, I'm going to scroll down to my definition of this. So basically what's happening is above a certain threshold that you set. Remember that before I talk about this, we set volume. When we talk about volume in a DAW and on a digital audio, we're talking about it in terms of decibels and dB. And it's kind of weird because on sometimes the dB, the maximum dB you can have is 0 dB, and then it goes down to minus infinity. It always goes down to minus infinity. Sometimes, but you can also have it go above 0 dB sometimes, but it depends on what scale you're using, or what. It's not gonna get into it. It's just college level stuff. But dB, just remember, dB equals loudness for our purposes. And so when I'm making these graphs, when I'm writing this little symbol here, that means the loudness. That's how loud it is. So as we get louder, so let me just read this out. So compressors lower the volume of incoming audio by a set ratio. Now, what is a ratio? Ratio is like 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. I'm sure that you have encountered ratios in math class before. Oh God, not math. But yeah, I mean, a lot of music is math, so it's gonna come up. So audio comes in. If it's above a certain threshold that you set, so above a certain dB level, so maybe you set minus 20 dB is the threshold. Any audio that comes through that's above 20 dB, is louder than 20 dB, above that threshold, is then lowered in volume by a ratio. So maybe if it's a 3 to 1 ratio, it would be lowered. It would be a third of the volume if it's above that, right? So let's say that a bit of audio comes in. Well, let's actually look at it in the software here. So we can see that the threshold is about we'll make it like minus 24. You can see it crosses that line, so minus 24 is here. And then you can see the red line is telling you how much gain reduction, how much the volume is being reduced. So it crosses that line. Immediately the compressor kicks in and lowers the volume by, what's our ratio set at? Let's set it to 3 to 1. Can I type this in maybe? Yes, I can. 3 to 1. And we'll get to knee in a second. Goes above that, lowers the volume, and as it decays, the compressor also disengages, so it stops lowering the volume. You can see that it curves back up. As it crosses back over the threshold, the compressor dies off. Let's talk about the knobs one at a time. So we have the threshold, right? So we just talked a lot about that. That's the volume level at which it the volume level. Okay. Sometimes it's hard to English, you know. But the volume at which the compressor will kick in, at which the compressor will start to lower the volume. Next, we have ratio. That is, once it's crossed the threshold, how much will the volume be lowered by, and you can see kind of the output volume. So it would be useful maybe if we had like a dotted line that went up that showed you if you had a 1-to-1 ratio. Like, let's say you had a 1-to-1 ratio. This is what it would look like. So you have bottom left to right. So like this is what no volume reduction looks like. You can see that it just comes through. Okay, so if we turn up the ratio, you can see above that threshold, the slope gets shallower. Therefore, and that's, you can think of the audio as being underneath the slope on this side of it. So it's getting crushed down, it's getting compressed down, and lowered in volume. So all the compressor at this stage, the compressor is just lowered the volume by the certain ratio. Next, you have your attack. So you can see here a little description. I'm going to read this out here. So the attack now determines how quickly compression will kick in, ranging from 0.005 milliseconds to 250 milliseconds. So that pretty much sums it up, right? Attack determines, so once it crosses the threshold, it will take this amount of time for the compressor to be fully engaged, therefore, like, meaning the compressor will be lowering the volume by the said ratio, but it will do it over time, so it'll like curve into it. So let's say I made like, and this might not be very demonstrable, might not be possible to do. We'll try maybe a 20 millisecond attack, and we'll see what the curve looks like now. Okay, so maybe let's get a closer look. Ooh, here we go. Okay. Can I go large? Yes, I can go large. Let's put up that attack. Now, you can see if I bring it way down, you can see that the gain reduction actually, or there's actually more gain reduction because the compressor is activating faster, therefore it's able to catch more of the audio. So maybe we'll if we turn the attack up, you can see that the initial slope of this first line, the downward part. First of all, the valley gets shallower, right? It does less gain reduction because it has less of a chance to catch because the compressor isn't activating in time. So that slope of the line gets shallower. The slope of the downward part of the slope gets shallower. Just meaning, practical terms, takes longer to kick in. It lags a little bit. Release is kind of is on the opposite end. Once it crosses back over the threshold, once it's less than the threshold, how long does it take for the compressor to stop reducing the gain, to bring back the gain, to deactivate? So if we were to increase this knob, you'll see that the curve will get the spike will get much bigger. So I'm going to turn down the attack so we get a full bit of gain reduction there, and I'm going to pull out the release now. And you'll see that resulting curve gets a lot larger, and it takes longer for it to go back to its previous level. And also you can hear the change. You can like hear more of the ending bit of that shh at the end because it's being brought up, or it's not being brought up, but the peak is being brought down. Now, at the very end here, we have dry gain and wet gain. Let's just talk about it in terms of gain, right? We'll say makeup gain. After all this is done, right? After you lowered the volume, you want to maybe then bring the volume back up afterwards so that it's back at a level that you can hear it among other instruments. So that's what wet gain is for. Once it's all been processed, once it's been compressed, once it's had its gain reduction, you turn up the wet gain and it boosts it a certain amount of dB. So we'll give it plus 2 dB after all of it's done. Which means not only is the compressor lowering the volume of loud parts, it's raising the volume of soft parts. So it's kind of equaling out. It's leveling everything out. It's lowering what's called dynamic range. So if you ever played an instrument, you know about dynamics and how loud or soft something's supposed to be played. Well, this lowers the range from pianissimo to fortissimo, to mezzo forte to forte. That's kind of what it's doing in music terms, right? So that might be useful, say maybe if you have a vocalist too, like it's good on vocals if someone's maybe singing quiet and it's just yelling into the mic afterwards during a loud section, throw a compressor on them, and then you get equal volume throughout the whole track. When maybe if they're whispering, a lot of pop singers like to whisper nowadays. You know who I'm talking about. Compressors. They need compressors to bring up the volume of their voice so that they can they can sing loud and sing soft, very soft, and they can adjust the settings of the compressor to suit whatever situation, right? Or they won't have to do as much adjusting because the compressor's equaling out the volume and you don't have to worry about things. Make sense? I think so. Let's take a look at some other, before we do that, I want to record this. I want to show you what the waveform ends up being after this gain reduction happens. So let's go ahead and do this. I'll take just the first part of that and we'll expand it out. Take a closer look. I'm going to give it, before I do this, actually, I'm going to give it more makeup gain. Because I'm doing quite a bit of lowering. We're going to make the settings more extreme. We'll go there. Pull up the release. And pull up the gain a lot, maybe 4 dB or so. And then we'll record. So let's compare the two samples now. So here's the first one, or here's the compressed version. Okay. So you can see here that you've got a little spike here at the beginning, and then you have kind of like it balloons out, and it looks like looks like you have kind of a curve into it. Right? It curves into this peak here. And then that decay is much larger than it was. It's much more visible, and it lasts a little longer. Now let's look at the original sample. We'll zoom into kind of the same spot. You can see here, much louder start, and then the decay is it kind of decays off pretty quick. But here, See, this is all brought down. It's brought in line with this. You have this spike here, which maybe you'd kind of cut off. Maybe if you would start it here or something. In post, you'd kind of get rid of this. Or maybe you want that little spike. But oh boy, that's phasey. Okay, I guess you have to play it from the beginning. Oh, right, because both are playing. So that's after. Oh, and this is compressing. So before. Oh, it's also going to be quite a bit louder, right? Because it's been lowered in volume. So let me then equal out the volume here. I'm going to boost this up some so that it's about the same spot as this. Minding that first bit. Perhaps I'll put a fade. Fade. Yeah, so that's before. And that's after. You see, psh, you hear a lot more psh. Hello, we have another viewer. Hi. So before, here, let me put them on the same track actually now that the compressor's off, so I can switch between them easier. So before, after, before, it's like more of a, it's like sharper. You have more of a transient, you have more of a sharp beginning, and then you have the compressed version, which is more just psh, like for the whole time, everything's the same volume. It's just a psh, which might be something you want. But it also kind of loses its, like, the slap that a snare is supposed to have, like the impact. It loses that. So maybe you would want to add that, or maybe layer this with something else. So maybe you play it at the same time. This is a technique called parallel compression, where you take a compressed version and the original version, you combine them together, and you could get maybe some hybrid version of the original sample. So like that. I'll lower the volume of this one. Or maybe I'll lower the volume of the original one. And you kind of get them in the right spot and tune it right. Up to you how you want to do it, but there's many ways that you can do this, and many ways you can use this. But yeah, the basic point: it equalizes out. They're not talking about EQs quite yet, but how can I'll use a different term? Evens out the volume across the whole time, the whole sample. Let's use it on, so I've got some Midi here from our previous day's track. Let me get the snare sound off. We don't need this quite. We don't need this right now. Turn off the compressor I have. I have a couple different ones to show too. I'll show you the Midi. Yeah, bunch of piano chords. Let's look at it in Fabfilter, in our compressor. Make it large so we can see better. So now let's see how a compressor can help us here. Let's start from nothing. So turn our ratio all the way down so we have no gain reduction. We have just a straight line. We'll go fast attack. We'll play with these settings. Oh, and I haven't talked quite about knee. I'll try a softer knee in this one. On the first instance we had compression, it's what you would call a hard knee. I'm going to switch to the drawing for this one. So it's what you would call a hard knee. So when you cross the threshold, immediately the compressor starts kicking in and starts reducing the volume. But so right here you have the kind of the steep, the shallower this slope gets, right? If it's up here, that's a smaller ratio, or a 1-to-1 ratio, right? It would be if you just had a, let me make a straight line. If you had a 1-to-1 ratio on this, This is what the output would look like, and your audio would just pass through. Nothing would happen. But you had a 3-to-1 ratio, a 4-to-1. This slope gets steeper, shallower and shallower and shallower. You can think of your audio as being down here underneath. It just gets crushed, like its dynamic range gets crushed down. But yeah, hard knee here, and then if I were to adjust the knee, you would call it a soft knee. So your threshold is about maybe here, threshold. Right, so this is in dB. So dB, maybe it's like minus 15 here. This is minus infinity. This is 0. Sometimes it can be above, so maybe I'll do 0 to plus 12. Don't get too caught up in the terms or the technicalities of dB and all that. You know, just higher the dB, the louder it is. But it's often, it does go to negative infinity, and oftentimes it'll be maxed out at 0. Digress. We have the threshold here and the knee, and basically it makes the ratio dynamic. So right, this curve represents the ratio, right? So here is a 1-to-1 ratio below the threshold, and then above the threshold we have a whatever, a 3-to-1 ratio. I'll draw it in. This is not exact. Getting a spam call. I think it's a spam call. Anyway, let me draw this better. 1-to-1 here. And then above the threshold, let's say it's 3-to-1 ratio. Okay. And then around it, you would have different, depending on how close you were to the threshold, maybe here it would be like a 1.5 to 1. And then maybe here it would be like a 2.3 to 1. And so on and so forth. It would have a curve, and it would, I guess you could say exponentially in math lingo. It exponentially goes to, or logarithmically goes to the new knee. And you can see here in the plugin that is visually represented when we turn up the ratio. And we have, so you have here at this one end, you have, like I said already, we have hard knee and soft knee. So if I turn it towards hard, we have that sharp angle. Everything above the threshold automatically just lowered. But if we turn our ratio, by the way, I'm looking to the side because this is where chat is, and I'm also seeing a preview of the stream over here. Just if you're confused, like, why am I looking over there? Camera's over here. I probably said that already, but I just keep repeating. Just like to be clear. Turn the ratio up. The slope gets shallower and shallower. Right? Yeah, all the way up to even 100-to-1. It's just a flat line. Anything above is this volume and nothing else. That is the thing you can do. It's like a super high ratio. It's possible. I like to keep it's kind of reasonable though. You usually want to keep it around, so you still have some dynamic range. You usually want to keep it at most 4, unless you're really using it for some specific purposes. Okay. So for this track, this is a compressor on our piano track, right? You can see how it's activating it. And you can see the much longer decay of the piano, and you can see the gain reduction that's happening. So we're going to raise the threshold up, so anytime this waveform gets above this level, we can show or hide the knee. I'm going to make it a soft knee now, and we'll watch how the curve changes as I change the knee. I'm going to bring the threshold down so we have a more dramatic gain reduction. I'll bring up the attack. So now you have the shape of the gain reduction kind of mirroring the shape of the of the piano, right? You can see how it's being equaled out, right? Like this is subtraction from regular, right? Let's turn up our knee, and we'll see what happens to the curve. This part gets a little shallower. Hard knee kind of has a steeper drop off. Maybe if I do a soft, kind of averages it out a little bit more. It draws it out some. Alright, you can see this is like crazy. This is like, it's just a completely smooth curve. So we have a more kind of squished, compressed sound coming out of this. It's cool just watching the curves. Alright, we'll turn the attack up and we'll watch how the starting curve changes. Especially now when I pull it up to like 100 milliseconds. You can see it just like swoops down. You can't really hear it activating that much. But with a short attack, you can hear it like a bang. You can hear it like, it's kind of has more of an impact, you know? Will the attack up? So it's really up to taste. It's really up to preference of you know, if you play with the settings enough, you kind of find a sound that you like. I'm liking this sound. Let's bring everything up to compensate for the loss of volume. And then let's do a little sampling here, and let's do a side-by-side comparison of these. So first, I'm going to do it without compression. Just record this in. Okay, that's it. We'll just do that much. Turn it on. So now let's look at them. So here is before compression, and here is after compression. Before, you can see everything just kind of gets brought up a little bit. You actually get more of a transient at the beginning because you have that fast attack that just, and I could even do, there's another setting in the compressor. Let's say that you wanted to, a term that is often used, let's say you wanted to drive the audio into the compressor. Then you have this thing called you have the dry gain here. So this is the gain before it reaches the compressor. Let's say you wanted the compressor to activate sooner. You could bring the dry gain up, and then it'll go through the threshold ratio. So it'll hit the threshold more often if it's a louder sample, right? So that's essentially what you're doing here. You're driving it into the compressor. This is after it's been compressed, you're bringing it up. I'm going to make it more extreme. Again, I'm going to make the settings more extreme just so we can see a clearer picture. Because this might just be like, okay, yeah, it's generally louder, but let's make it like flatline. Let's make it just an extreme effect. Why not? You know? Why not? Let's go back to our grand piano. And go here. We'll pull the threshold down. And we'll make it a hard knee so it activates quicker. We'll make it a faster attack so it goes right away. Maybe we'll go around 8 milliseconds of an attack. And then I'll pull the release out a bit. And maybe I'll even put on a bit of hold. So what hold does, this is kind of not in every compressor. This is kind of like exclusive. But you might see this when we get to when we get to synthesis. That hold, it has to do with an envelope and yada yada yada. But yeah, the attack, which is the starting curve, right? It goes in, starts activating, and how long that takes is based on the attack. And then you have a hold time. So even if it goes, the audio goes below the threshold, that compressor is going to stay activated right after the attack. It's going to stay activated for however long you set the hold to be. So let's set it to something extreme, like 150 milliseconds. So you'll see that it comes in, flatlines for a little bit. You can see that little flat part there. That is the hold. I'll pull it up some more. There, now you can really see it. Let's make it a fast release. It's still kind of activating. It's always above the below the threshold. Let's pull this up then. Pull the hold back. Ratio up. This one down. We can even do different styles with this one, and it'll sound a little bit different. Let's try classic. Opto, maybe. I'll make it more a noticeable effect. Plus. Punch, maybe? Cool. Let's do that much. Alright. Let's record the compressed version. Alright. It looks about the same. But yeah, you get the point. It all is around the same level now. Before, after, before, after. I don't want to play both at the same time. Alright, we could look at some other types of compressors as well. There's another one by Fabfilter. Oh, actually, this isn't a compressor. I suppose, let's look at Soundtrap's compressor. Why not? Let's look at the one that you all will be using. How about that? Or the varieties of some that Soundtrap has. Let's try compressing a track that we haven't yet touched, that we could perhaps mess with. I think the clone, we do have a compressor on this already. We'll take it off and we'll start from scratch with our bass track. And you can see here the waveforms on the clips. So I'm going to make this track bigger, the track we are working on. Oops, not that one, smaller. I want bass clone to be bigger. I have to drag it down from the bottom. We'll get rid of loops for now. We don't need that. By the way, if you would like to participate, I can go ahead and send out invites. Suggested people. I can invite both of my top students, viewers. I don't know if Nate's watching. Who else is watching? We have 2 viewers. Say hello in chat. Why don't you? But feel free to join in on the project. You can do it on your phone, too. So let's take a look at this bass track. Yes, I am. I don't need to record on it, though. So let's say I had just loaded the sample, or this is another sliced sample, right? I found this bass clone track in the loop browser, dragged it in, sliced it up to how I'd like it, and put the notes where they need to go, and we ended up with this little riff here. And I still might need to do some changes with the notes. It's not finalized, but I can do the effects and get the sound right. So let's say you had just loaded up this new audio track and you've dragged it on. So you'll end up with something like this, or not here, this. You'll end up with voice clean, right? This is the most basic you could have it. And if you go here and you look at instrument presets, you can see all of the preset settings that you have for effects, basically. So if I load up, say, Jaco Chica for bass, it loads up a stereo chorus, dynamics compressor, and changes the, or it doesn't change the basic amp, but it changes the parameters, the knobs of the basic amp. So yeah, add some effects, basically. We're gonna do it ourselves, though. We're not gonna pick from a preset. We're not like that. We are original here. So let's go back to the most basic we could do: voice, clean, and start from scratch. So what does the track sound like now? This is what it would sound like in the loop browser, by the way. I mean, it already sounds pretty good, right? But it could use some cleaning up. It could use some fades, first of all. I wonder if there's an easy way to do the fade besides automation. Just region overlap. Yeah, I thought there was. I remember if there was an easy way to add fades to a clip. There is in Ableton. There's always the way in Ableton. Anyway, we have a decent sounding bass track. Let's say what we want to compress it. But first, we're gonna throw it through an amp, which has some bits of EQ. So this can be a good segue into talking about EQ, because we'll put a compressor on the bass track, but we also are presented with this basic amp here. So it goes through this basic amp, and we have options to choose from. We have vocal amp, guitar amp, acoustic guitar, bass cruncher, standard, yada yada. They all have a different sound and different knobs you can use. I'm going to choose bass amp cruncher. So let's go ahead and compare. So basic amp, just on its own. That, and then cruncher. Automatically a different sound. Let's go ahead and do a little loop section here. I'll zoom out so I can find it. It's over here. I'll move it and make it smaller. Get this looping over and over. Let's choose a different one. Bass amp standard. I want one with presence. Guitar amp. Aha. So we can play with this drive and presence to get some distortion going on. But what I'm interested in are these bass, mid, and treble knobs, and a compressor I'm going to add. So first, go add effect. We have several choices for a compressor, by the way. We have the compressor 1, which is about as simple as it gets. It's literally a single knob, and you turn it up, it's more compressed, down, less compressed. I mean, just disregard all the explaining I did. There you go. It's like compressor 1. We're gonna pull it up. It doesn't even tell you what the knob does. It's just there. More compressed, less compressed. See, I don't like this because now it lowers the volume, and I have no way of bringing it up aside from bringing up the volume other places like here or on the track. But see, now I'm limited. I suppose I just have to bring other tracks down to kind of balance it out. But yeah, you have compressor 1. If you're just looking for quick results, you just want this track to be less loud, throw compressor 1 on there. Otherwise, you want more control, because more control is always better, go for the dynamics compressor. So this has all the things we had just saw, we have the attack release, how long it takes to engage, how long it takes to disengage, the ratio, how much it compresses after it crosses the threshold, and then the knee, how smooth that crossing is. Like how close to the threshold, it's like a dynamic ratio, right? So like when you get closer to the knee, it starts dropping off closer and closer down to 1, kind of smooths out like that, right? When with a hard knee, it's just a boom, boom, right? Boom. You're cross the ratio, now you're compressing, cross back, now you're not compressing, right? Knee gives it that smoothness, and it's good to have some smoothness because maybe you want to hide the fact that you're compressing it. Maybe you want the compressor as just a way of cleaning something up and making it heard everywhere. You don't want it to like actually change the sound too much. Okay. So yeah, you have all your things. I'm gonna throw this on there, and you see here GR. This stands for gain reduction. Shows you how much the compressor's doing. So let's adjust it until it does something. Nice. Now let's hear it with everything else. Cool. Now it doesn't stand out so much. Awesome. All right. I do realize I have been on this topic for a while, so we might not have too much time to talk about EQ, but I will do a couple basic things with it. First of all, what is EQ? So we have compressors dealing with the volume level of audio, but there is sort of another dimensioned audio that we haven't really talked about talked about as much. I've mentioned it here and there, the concept of frequencies and stuff being high frequencies versus low frequencies, and let's say general idea of this: bass drums, tubas are low frequencies, or notes that are lower. So perhaps this. Let's pull up a grand piano so I can play a low note. It's buffering the samples. Give it 1 moment. So a lower note would be have more bass. It would be bass. Let's go ahead and pull up an EQ afterwards, so that we can look at what frequencies, or where the frequencies are. I'll pull up an EQ8. By the way, EQ, I'm going to draw this out. I haven't done much of a little diagram for this. EQ. Okay. Let me go back to my... Okay, so EQ is basically a graph showing you... So this is your frequencies right now. And this is not time anymore. Before it was like volume over time with a compressor, and now we have frequency. We have high frequencies, and we measure frequencies in a unit called hertz. Don't worry too much about it, but that's the unit for frequency, and it goes. And we have our ears can only hear a certain range of frequencies. So, right, a little bit about kind of the fundamentals of sound, right? So, sounds are waves in the air, pressure changes in the air, and those pressure changes travel in waves, and those waves are pressure waves, so it goes kind of back and forth, and are just movements in the molecules in the air, and that travels, and it's vibrations, right? So it vibrates at a certain frequency, at a certain rate, and that's essentially how speakers work. You have the inner part of a speaker vibrate at you, right? When and you might not see it in your phone, right? Your phone has also got speakers built in. It's very, very, very small. Let me just quickly point at. So, oh, excuse my shoddy camera work, but for example, yeah, so you have a speaker here, and then you have what's known as the speaker diaphragm, and then this vibrates and then sends sound towards you, and then you have this speaker's actually got two parts. It's got what's called a woofer, and then it's called a tweeter. So it's got a smaller little part in here, and if we look inside, you can't really see it that well, but there's a smaller little piece that also vibrates, and this gives us our high frequencies. This gives us our low frequencies, because lower frequency waves are a larger wavelength, therefore they need a larger diaphragm speaker to just really briefly, really, not getting too much into the science, but that's how speakers work. They vibrate, send sound at you, and depending on the frequency of vibration, or depending how fast that vibration happens, tells you the frequency. Your ears pick it up as lower or higher frequency, as bass or treble sounding. So we can represent this on a graph. So down here, and I had mentioned that our ears can only hear a certain range of frequencies. A certain range of those vibrations can be only picked up by our ears, and the mechanism inside our ears. And I've done an entire class on like how your ear. I don't remember most of it, but like the mechanisms of your ear is very interesting. The mechanisms of your ear. And how it picks up those vibrations and sends the signals to your brain to yada yada yada, how the body works. It's fascinating stuff, really. Look up the cochlea if you're interested. Anyway, we can represent frequencies on a graph. So down here we have our lower end of our range of hearing. We have 20 hertz, so we can hear down to 20 hertz, and we can hear up to 20,000 hertz. So then let's say, so we had put the snare drum right through an EQ. Now this is actually on the piano track. Let's put it on the snare drum track. I'll drag EQ8 down here. Let's repeat the snare. And we can see a graph. This is the compressed snare. No, actually that was the dry snare. This is a uncompressed version. So if you can make it larger, we can see better a graph here. So here we have little numbers at the bottom. These are in hertz. This is 100 hertz, 1 kilohertz, 10 kilohertz, all the way up to 20k here, somewhere off at the end. And we have this line here in the middle, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's just look at the snare drum passing through this graph, and we can see the frequencies that make up the snare drum. So up here you have a bunch of sharp stuff. Let me move my mouse around. You have a bunch of sharper looking parts. This is the higher frequency. This is the snares of the snare drum. This is the tss, tss. And for example, here in the middle, you have the kind of the tone of the buh, buh. Maybe here you see this kind of distinct peak right here. That's kind of like the tone of the snare. I would say that's like the drum, right? The drum itself, the buh, buh, the buh, something like that. And then you have this big distinct peak here, and then down here you have all of that low energy that comes with the snare, all the thump. You can see the makeup of it here. Now what an EQ does is it allows you to emphasize or pull back, so lower or raise certain frequencies that you want. You can emphasize certain frequencies, you can take away certain frequencies, and you do it with this curve here in the middle. So you can see this curve has 4 points, and it can have up to 8. You can see down here in the knobs, we have up to 8 knobs possible, 8 points on this line. And let's say I were to grab one of the points, pull it up. So now You can get more or less low end with this way, so more or less low frequencies. I'll tell you right now, something that is an EQ is often used for is to not only lower low frequencies, but cut them entirely, because sometimes, a lot of times, you'll have a bass going on in your track, and maybe you don't want the snare or some other instrument, what you'd say mud up your bass. It would get in the way. You'd have two low frequencies going on at the same time and then clash, and it would make it really hard to hear the bass line. So what you would do with an EQ is you could go in and let's change the type of curve it's using. So we can go in and see, we move it up and down. We can change its behavior. So this is actually called a low shelf, the way it's doing, what it's doing right now. And we can change the shape of that curve down here, this little menu. And now we have this shape that cuts off anything below it. So let's say you don't want all of that low stuff going on. You can throw this curve on, and you can see only the stuff. You can see as I bring this up, you get less and less low end. Bring it back. You can also hear the change in the sound. Let's pull it way up. So you only hear the. So that's the high frequencies, very high frequencies. So let's take the point at the end. By the way, if I were to just drag one of these points, we get like a hump or a valley, so you can boost or cut certain frequencies, and you can also go in and change the steepness of that valley or peak by using something called the quality or the Q. So down here you have the frequency, gain, and then Q. So you can make this curve wider or less wide. So say you wanted to emphasize whatever was happening at 1K. And let's do this. Let's do this. I'm going to bring this back down to 0. And I'm going to make number 4 the opposite of number 1. So that we get sort of we can sort of isolate a frequency and just hear it. So let's say we wanted to hear what's going on around this range. It's like, what's happening at 1K? Let's say I wanted to something you might do with EQ. Let's say you wanted to find that tone, that duh. Let's say you wanted to find where that is. So let's kind of undo. Well, I'll leave this, and then I will take that off because I want the high frequencies. What we could do is take one of these curves, one of these points. We can raise it up, and we can move it around, and we can listen to see when it gets boosted the most and when it gets the most annoying. And then you could essentially clean up your sound. It was like you find this. Oh, I'll demonstrate. Right there. I think I found it. You can hear it like resonates a lot more at that point. We're just focusing in on this little peak. Let's boost it up. Yeah, definitely we want to maybe do something about it. Or not. But I think we do. Oops, I already found it. Let's kind of move it back to where it was. I want to make a valley, but not a very wide valley, kind of just more of like a notch out of it. So I'm going to lower the Q down. Oops, wrong one. I want to lower number 2's Q. I'm going to pull it down. Oh, wait. Definitely, this is the opposite of what I wanted. I want that. So just kind of a cutting out of that primary little frequency. You get a slightly cleaner sound. You can also use it to cut off some more at the high end if you wanted. Or just remove. We can add another point. Now there's another word for what each of these points are. Like, what are these essentially? What is an EQ made up of? It's got 8 sets and knobs, and 8 points you can make this line out of. But what is the line doing? Well, there's a term that we use when you are dealing with frequencies and you're dealing with the cutting out or boosting of certain frequencies. It's called filtering. Filtering. I'm gonna write this down. Filter. So, let me go to my iPad. Filtering. So, we have frequency. It's the same thing. We have frequency here, and then loudness, dB. There are several types of filters. There's some that cut out the high end. So, high frequencies. That's a weird G. High frequencies can get cut off. This particular filter. So this is a filter right here. This shape is a filter. This is called a low pass filter. When you see kind of a curve like this. Think of these all as EQs with a single point. So we're essentially discussing what that point is. What is a filter? This is what a low pass filter looks like. Cuts out any high frequencies and just goes to zero after a certain, well, you guessed it, a threshold. Right? Actually, no, you would be better to call it a cutoff. So at a certain frequency, just the same as you have a threshold in a compressor for a certain level of volume, it would perhaps make more sense if I drew it as a vertical line, because this is at a certain frequency, at a certain value in hertz, as opposed to a certain value of dB, does the filter start to work. So if you have a lower cutoff, let's say you have your cutoff at 300 hertz, everything after 300 hertz will be reduced at this by this downward slope caused by the low pass filter. There are other types of filters, and also, by the way, it's called low pass because it lets the low frequencies pass through and cuts out the high frequencies. I'm going to take just a little copy of this and just remove that and this and this. There is an inverse. There's an exact opposite to this frequency, which is called the high pass filter. High. Sometimes it's like that, or like that, whatever you want to do. The high pass filter lets the high frequencies pass through, and at the cutoff point, anything below the cutoff point is cut away, is removed. And then you have kind of other varieties of filter shapes. So let's do this. Maybe, well, what if you were to combine the both of them? If you were to combine a low and high pass filter. Low plus high pass filter. So if you were to combine them in this way, so low pass filter on the left, high pass filter on the right, you end up with what's called a bandpass filter. So why is it band? Why would we say band? Because when we're referring to frequencies, we can refer to a range of frequencies as a band, a certain band. What can I relate it to? A group of frequencies, a range of volume would be maybe from like minus 12 dB to minus 6 dB. That would be a volume range, and a band of frequencies is essentially a range of frequencies. So a bandpass filter will let a certain range of frequencies through and cut everything on either side of it. So maybe from 1K to 5K. Let's emulate that in Ableton. So if I wanted a bandpass filter, I could do it with an EQ. So I can probably, I'm not sure exactly where 5K is. I'm going to guess here, and then put the low pass filter at 1K, and there we have it, a bandpass filter. That's what the filter shape looks like. There are dedicated plugins. Why do I mention it's filters? Because there are, excuse me, dedicated plugins for just filters. In fact, we have one here called an auto filter. Man, this is an Ableton thing, but just to show you, right, it's got several filter shapes here. The low pass, which has that curve that we talked about, the frequency, so this is our cutoff. Let me make this bigger. Can I make it bigger? No. That's whatever. So, I'll go ahead and just play this. Pull this down. You'll be able to hear it better if I do it on the piano track. So I'll switch over to that. So here's a low pass filter. Let's put the EQ after the filter so we can see what's happening to the frequencies. So low pass filter. You can see all this stuff getting cut away. And then a high pass filter. So this will start cutting away at the left. You can see the low end dropping off. It kind of sounds more like it's on a telephone now or something like that. All the low end's missing. Now it's called auto filter because you can do something like this with it. Pull up the LFO. Pull up the rate. And you get something like that. You can get this filter to move. You get a nice little effect. Maybe do it with a low pass. So if you're moving this cutoff pointer, you couldn't really do this with a EQ. You'd have to like, essentially it's like moving back and forth like this, right? Let's turn off the LFO for now. Then here's a bandpass. Oh, another thing you can do with filters is you can emphasize the motion of a filter by changing what's called resonance. So I push this up, you get a little peak before it goes down. So check this out. So goes up, then goes down. So if I pull the frequency up, you can hear the wow, like that sound. Well, let's say we pull it way up. I'm starting to get some crazy sounding things going on. Let's do some motion here. I'm going to sync it to the beat. Let's combine it with something. Maybe cut out the low end. Emphasize a certain part. Let's maybe do something with the notes. Very quick, I'm going to throw an arpeggiator on. it is being compressed, right? Oh. You get some crazy things going on with these filters. Ah, I haven't even gone through the filter shapes yet. You have a notch filter next. So you've got the bandpass filter. There's another... Okay, let me go to the drawings here. So you've got the bandpass filter. Next, then you have the band stop filter. So several names for this one. Band stop filter or the notch filter. Because what it looks like is this. So it is basically a high plus a low pass, right? It's the inverse of it, right? It cuts out a band. It stops a band from passing through. Instead of, so right, it would be a high pass plus, well, we're not going to use it. Just think of it like this. Think of this shape, right? This lets a band pass through. This is a low pass for this side and then a high pass for this side. However you'd like to think of it, but this is the shape of a notch filter. And with an EQ, the whole point of bringing up these filters in the first place, besides all the sound design capability you have with them, was to prove the point that an EQ, an equalizer, you can use it to clean up stuff. You can use it to like take out or mess with certain frequencies, balance things around, and like get it how you want it to sound. But an EQ is a bank of filters. It is a collection of filters and basic filters. So for, let's say this one, this is a filter in itself, and you're moving that filter shape around. So now you have a boost filter. So this is actually what you would call a peak filter, because you don't have reductions on either side. You just have a boost in a certain frequency. So this would be called a peak filter. And this would be called a notch filter, because it is just a notch out, a reduction in this one frequency. So if we were to essentially turn all of the other filters off, this is that filter on its own. And then you sort of stack the other ones on top. So I'm stacking on top a high pass filter here, and then a low pass filter on top with 4, and then maybe a boost around 3, and you get kind of some... We'll bypass it. A different sound. Let's choose a different pattern, maybe. Cool. So I'll off camera import this into the Soundtrap project, and I did say collaboration and all that, but I got caught up in the explanations. I always do this. I always say one thing and then do another thing. It's fine. We will get around to putting things in. I haven't even thought of what y'all could contribute, but this project is, I believe, accessible. Anyway, it'll be accessible during the stream. So, you all have been invited to the project, or Lily, I know you're here, and I'm not sure about who else is watching, but any BVMP students are free to join in anytime when I'm working specifically in Soundtrap. I will try to work more in Soundtrap tomorrow, but I wanted to primarily work in Ableton today because of the ability to show off the EQ like this. But what about the EQ in Soundtrap? Before I sign off, I'm going to sign off maybe 125 or so. I want to show you the EQ in Soundtrap. Let's load up this track. Or let's open it up. So perhaps I want to do some EQ work to the bass track. So we got the compressor on here. I don't know why it flashes like that. It's kind of annoying. Let's look right next to Dynamics Compressor. We have the equalizer. So this is actually a different view entirely. So there's actually two types of EQs or more. Two primary types of EQs. There's the parametric, without getting too much into what that means. That was what we were just looking at, the curves and the banks of filters. That is a parametric EQ, where you can move it around however you'd like. This is a graphic EQ, so it is a little more manual. So you can kind of just move these sliders around, and then that makes the shape of your curve, right? So let's say you wanted a low pass filter, then you could sort of bring down certain sliders to make the shape you wanted. And then let's say you wanted a boost around this frequency, and then maybe on this a cut around here. Let's hear it. Let's hear just the bass drum, bass. So let's go ahead and default it. So let's go load it up again, so we can kind of mess with the shape here. Make sure it's looping. So right, you're essentially getting a peak filter, right, where you raise this one slider, notch filter here. This would be a low pass filter, this kind of shape. But you can think of all of these sliders as a bank of, let's see how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 filters in a single bank, right? So that's what it is. Essentially, it's just a bunch of filters in a row. And those can be either peak or notch in this case, a reduction or not a reduction. This one doesn't have as much control as the ones in Ableton do, being that the Ableton each curve has its own Q or quality or own wide width or narrowness to it. This is kind of more basic. It's just more static. You can't really see, like, you have frequencies going from left to right, but it's kind of less precise. But that's okay. You know, you can still achieve what you want to achieve this way, but more crudely. Yeah. Here, actually, check it out. I just said we have two types of EQs. We have the parametric and the graphic. This is the graphic. Over here, we have the parametric EQ. Problem is, though, this is, so right here, so you have high frequency, the gain, so how high or how low this is. So this frequency, so this is a 3-band EQ, so let's just take out band number 4 to represent what this is. Okay, so 3-band EQ. Let me bring this back to default. Okay, so low frequency, so you can move this around. It's a shame it doesn't tell you what hertz it is, but yeah, you can move that low frequency up or down. The middle frequency up or down, the high frequency up or down. So you have the low frequency probably from around here to here, middle frequency from around here to here, high frequency from here to here. You have your gain, so how high up or how down low. That's the gain. And then you have right here this wider or narrower knob, which is basically your Q knob. I'm not going to get into why it's called Q. It's pretty complex, actually. It's pretty interesting. No, I wouldn't say interesting, and I guess it's not exactly why it's called quality factor, but there's science behind it. It has to do with the way it's actually working, like code wise. But it dates back to analog devices. this all used to be done on dedicated, like there might be like a dedicated box, like electronic box for just an equalizer, full of all sorts of like tech. But that's before the days of digital, when now you can do it on a website. Before, you had to get professional, expensive equipment to do something like this. But we're blessed. We're living in the 21st century, 2020, and we can do an EQ in our browser. Amazing. But yeah, you have a basic 3-band parametric EQ here that you can adjust certain frequencies with, tighten up or loosen up the Q, and you can play around with this and kind of tune a track. Like you can get a general result. Like let's say you can go in and say, okay, I want less high end in this bass, so high frequency, bring it there, lower the gain, and kind of bring down a larger area. So we'll widen the Q. So essentially what we're doing is we're kind of going up here, and we're doing a little reduction like that. So we end up with, hard to tell right now. I see. So here's how it works. Basically, you have gain minus and gain plus. When the knob is in the middle, that's unchanged, and to the left or right. So this is a notch, that's a peak, and this is where it is. So yeah, very basic. At least in Soundtrap. Soundtrap makes it, I wouldn't say makes it very basic, but kind of simplifies the UI, the user interface of things. I like seeing visually the frequencies go through and having a graph, but you know, Ableton's expensive, so but there you can do it for free here. But yeah, this is I did it mainly just because, you know, good way to show these things off. Okay, I'd like to show you one quick thing before I go. Perhaps there are some plugins, there are some external software plugins. There are, for sure, there are tons out there. Equalizers. So this isn't the, let's perhaps use the Pro Q. So we will use the Fabfilter Eq. So check it out. So this is their version. Click anywhere, create a change. Oh my goodness. My goodness. Yeah, this one's good. This one's good. So low shelf, low cut. So it gives you different types of filter curves. You can combine them together, and you can boost and cut in certain areas. It's very precise. You can change the Q. You can change the gain. Okay, can you not? Frequency, as you could before. And there's all sorts of other. You have the shape. So let's change it to a notch. You can see here that is indeed a notch that goes down to infinity now. So there's many pieces of software out there that does the same thing, and many DAWs out there that do the same thing, that lower or raise certain frequencies. That is essentially what we are doing when we are EQing something, when you're equalizing. When we are messing with frequencies, we're cleaning it up. And I can talk more at it. It's hard to talk about these things. We're talking about it like generally, but like we can go into specific use cases when like I'm working on a specific one instrument, for example, or like it. What I'm saying is it depends. It depends how you use the EQ. It depends what you want to do, and how it is what is needed with the audio, and it might not obviously not something you would know yet, but that's what it's doing, altering the frequencies. So hopefully this has been a somewhat good introduction to these two very essential effects for mixing audio on a computer, making a good sounding clean track. And we can go over we'll go over as we start to build a track in the coming week or so. How we can use the compressor and EQ in specific ways to do cleanup, to make things sound better. We'll talk about and now that we've seen an EQ, and now that we know a little bit about the terms and how it works, we can start to use it to our advantage in achieving certain goals. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to put it. Pretty general way to put it. Doesn't really kind of tell you much, but you're just gonna have to tune in tomorrow to find out how we use compressors and EQs on our tracks to make things better. Specific cases, and it's not just gonna be like a whole day on that. We're not just gonna do tomorrow with compressors and EQ too. We're gonna of course move on to different effects, but now that this has been covered, I'm gonna maybe say, okay, this track needs a compressor, so I'm gonna put it on and I'm gonna set it with certain settings, and I'll explain as I go, but I'll use the terms that I've discussed today. It's like, okay, I'm going to put a compressor on this with 3:1 ratio because I want maybe a little bit of reduction, or I'm going to put an EQ on this to lower the mid-range a bit because it's kind of conflicting with the vocals. Like guitar maybe has a lot of mid-range, and vocals has a lot of mid-range too, but you want to hear the vocals more than the guitar, but you still want the guitar's high end and low end to stand out and fill out the mix. So you would probably do a reduction in the middle with a little notch or a little bell curve. Stuff like that. Really specific use cases of things conflicting and cleaning up stuff. We'll talk more about it as we go on. As we encounter the problems, we will solve them with the tools at our disposal. Sound good? Alright, that is all for today. I need to eat something. So, this is going to be wrong, but it's not Tuesday because obviously today's Tuesday, and it's going to be Wednesday tomorrow at 11. I'm going to be starting the stream around 11, probably 11:05, let's be real. And, yeah, and then I'm going to start then, probably wait around till 11:30. So if you're coming by again, you can stop by before 11, around 11 or so. Yeah. Okay, I've got to change this to Wednesday. Should have done this already, but I didn't. Now it's correct. Alright. That's all for today. See you next time.